Who knows more people in this audience because Chapel Hill is my hometown. Aziz was on stage with the Pope a month ago, speaking to an audience of 15,000 people in Italy. So he's kind of a big deal. In Chapel Hill, my name goes a little bit. Anywhere else in the world, Aziz is definitely. And so we first met when I interviewed Aziz for the New York Times, and this was more than 2 years ago. Because as a journalist writing about travel, one thing I love to do is just kind of, as I'm speaking to people and looking around and doing my research, if I come across someone who's doing something exceptional, like really exceptional in the world of travel, then I send a little email to my editor and I say, hey, Suzanne, what do you think? Like, would you like to do a Q&A with this person who's doing something exceptional? And Aziz is exceptional in many ways, and I sent this pitch and she said yes, so I got to interview Aziz for the New York Times about the work that he does and trying to build peace through travel. And then I joined his tour company's group trip in Israel and Palestine a couple months later, and I was going to put this in the book. It didn't end up in the book for various reasons. Well, namely the war in Gaza, and this was not time to be writing about tourism there. But anyway, so this is a brief introduction to Aziz, and I'm just delighted. He was just in Portugal, and now he's on his way to Aspen, Colorado for the Aspen Ideas Festival, and he's stopping off in Chapel Hill for 2 days to do this event with me. So thank you very much, Aziz, for making the time in your schedule.
Thank you.
But his home is in Greenville, South Carolina, so he's not. When he has a home, when he's home, it's in Greenville.
So I'm on a 3 months trip right now. I haven't been to my house since April, but and a little jet lag, but not planning on napping. But yeah, thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Paige, for having me here with you. And what we'll do is just have a conversation. I have some questions because I've been reading the book, and I have a few ideas of where we can go, and then the two of us will just when we meet, we normally just have a fun conversation, and we'll try to do the same, ignoring you. Just
bringing them into the conversation as well, Aziz, right?
For the first 20 minutes. And then we'll get you back with us. No, but seriously, thank you for having us. But yeah, I actually wanted to start with just you telling us why you decided to write this book. What, the whole idea of the new tourist, and especially in the beginning of the book, you talk about that, something I've done before, the difference between traveler, difference between tourist, and often on tours we'll tell people, be a traveler, don't be tourist. But you're writing a book about being a tourist, not a traveler.
Yeah, I'll start on that point maybe, because I would love to, if I could make some little small dent on broader conversations in the culture, I would love to try to strip away some of the stigma that we all feel around the word tourist, because I don't think it's really helpful. And I think to be a tourist is a really profound thing, and that when we sort of look down on tourists, we call ourselves tourists, we call ourselves travelers, like we're standing in line to get into the Louvre or something, and everyone else in front of us is a tourist, but I'm the artist here for the high and mighty reasons. No, you're a tourist, and I'm a tourist all the time. Heck, it's okay. Our redemption as tourists lies not in looking down on the other people who are doing the things we're doing. It lies in sort of realizing the enormous power that we carry, that we wield when we travel the world for pleasure, as cultural ambassadors, as movers of money and investment, and as people who are traveling to another place and having the chance to build a real human connection with someone whose background is completely different from our own. These are all can be really profound things, and I think if we look down on tourists eye roll, then we kind of strip ourselves of some of the agency that we have when we see the world. So I would say let's just try to work on improving the word, our affiliations with the word tourist.
So when I was doing research a few years back, and I was looking at why do people travel? What makes travel today different than how travel was, 100 years ago, 200 years ago? In the book, you go through how much travel have accelerated in a way that's crazy. I think just before the pandemic, we had 1.4 billion people that traveled internationally.
And they're going to break that record this year. It's going to be 1.5 billion in 2024 is the projection.
Whoa. So I was looking, and then this guy named Hassos Pode, who heads the Historical Archives and Tourism in the Free University in Berlin, he said that travel has changed significantly. And he said, once upon a time, basically, people were travel for a mission, for a purpose. He says, the pilgrims, for example, wanted to find salvation. The conquistors wanted to conquer. Tourism today, however, often doesn't include a mission and is purely for leisure. What do you think about that?
That's interesting. It reminds me of, it makes me think of the kind of an argument that I make in the last chapter of the book, where I'm kind of responding to an essay that was written in the New Yorker last summer, almost exactly a year ago, by a very noted philosopher named Agnes Callard, and it was called The Case Against Travel. And she's basically making this argument that tourists are kind of delusional. We think we're going to go to a place and come home transformed, but actually we're just ticking boxes. We're just pure consumers. We're inflicting ourselves on a place. We kind of are following bucket lists from other people, and it's a thoughtless exercise. My response to that is, yes, those people exist. Yes, I've probably been that person at some point, right? Have I been another type of person when I'm away from home as well? Like, absolutely. And so actually, it was reading that essay that kind of helped me come up with the whole framework for the book, and having the sort of the old tourist versus the new tourist kind of dichotomy. And so that the type of travel that the guy you quoted describes, and that Agnes Callard says that we all are when we travel. I see that as the old tourist, and there's a new, and there's a different, and there's a much more evolved way of doing things. And so my book is basically my personal kind of best and biggest effort to get to the land of this new tourist, and I'm kind of inviting the reader to come along with me. Like, let's go have some adventures. Let's meet some cool people. Let's meet some people whose views might challenge us, but let's go on some adventures, and let's become more enlightened travelers, more enlightened tourists while we do it. So, yeah.
And in the book, you actually show vulnerability about exploring where you were the old tourist sometimes. And I wanted to ask you about how easy it is to be vulnerable and how hard, because I know when I write, it is really difficult to be vulnerable, because a lot of people, anybody can know these things about yourself, and you being an expert on travel, and then you talk about the areas where you might be falling short when you go on this one trip, and then you put this reel, and this reel is heavily the old tourist of all the sites, but nothing about the tour guide, nothing about the culture, nothing about the stories, which many of us fall for that. And this is the difference between the old and the new tourists, that you talk about your own transformation going through it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I thought, if my goal is to kind of inspire, my goal is to sort of improve myself as a human being, and to inspire my readers to engage in some self-reflection. And so I read, there's a chapter where I kind of focus on social media and, Instagram and influencers in tourism. And it would have been very easy to pick some egregious examples that I see out in the world and kind of pick them apart, right? If I do that, okay, then what is my reader doing? They're sitting there and they're kind of going oh my God, isn't that awful what that person did too? But I'm okay, that's not, what I want to do. So I went back and I looked at my own Instagram posts, which I'm not some big influencer or anything, but I do my own little thing. And I found a reel that I'd made that I was that was really not an example of me at my best. And so, and I picked this apart, and I described, because this is what I want to encourage or just invite very gently my reader to do as well, to just be what, that decision I made, would I do it differently next time? Maybe I would, And so if I'm doing that myself and I'm showing that vulnerability, and it wasn't anything awful, right? It was just a little bit kind of light, L-I-T-E, sort of, and so I just kind of used myself as the straw man to knock down, and in so doing, I hope I might encourage other people to do it. And I think reading any writing, when someone becomes vulnerable, and in a memoir, and people can just really, open up and share, and it's just, that's what you connect with, right? That's what you take away. It's connecting with the vulnerability in another human being. So if I want to reach my reader here, that's the only way to do it.
What it takes, you think, for us to help our communities to move from being the old tourist to become the new tourist, other than reading the book. That would help.
Help our community, like you mean the communities that welcome tourists, or just like all of us?
All of us travelers and people who meet the travelers when they come to our towns and cities.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the classic sort of like, remember that when you're away from home, you're in someone else's home. You are in someone else's home, and whether it might be, the home of like the grasshoppers and the birds if you're out in the wilderness somewhere, or it might be, an Amsterdam red light district, like the 5,000 people who call the red light district home, and just act accordingly. When you stay in someone else's house, you hang up your towel and you offer to help with the dishes, and you're not going to play your music really loud in the middle of the night. So just keeping that sort of mindset, and remembering your power as a cultural ambassador. Like, whether you like it or not, you are an ambassador when you're away from home.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And and then when you are receiving tourist visitors, you're an ambassador for the place that this person is visiting. And remembering that actually first impressions when you visit another country and the people you interact with, that can leave a really lasting impression. If someone comes to the United States for a week and people are friendly or not. I'll share one little anecdote. I include this toward the end of the book. I was in one of the places I traveled to was Saudi Arabia, which was fascinating and eye-opening, and I was nervous to go, but I went. And on my last day there, I was actually on my way to the airport, and my tour guide, who I write a lot about in the book, she was going to drive me, but her pickup truck, the battery died. It was like kind of the end of the evening. We're in Riyadh, in kind of like a busy part of the city downtown, the parking lot. We get in the pickup truck. She's going to drive me. The car doesn't start. We're like, oh God, kind of get out of the car. She opens the hood. Instantly, like, this young man comes jogging over. He's wearing the kind of traditional Saudi thobe, like white kind of robe. Young guy, maybe 23, 24. And he's like offered to give us a jump, right? And he's speaking to her in Arabic, and then I hear her say the word American, and then he switches to English instantly. And he looks at me like, oh, wow, American. And I was like, yeah. Anyway, he jumps the thing. We're fine. I'm like, his name was Abdullah. I'm like, thank you so much. Like, shukran, Abdullah, thank you so much for, and he's like, wait, he didn't want me to go yet. And he was like, I went to America. I was there last year. And I was like, oh, wow. And he was like, my friend and I finished our architecture exams, and as a treat, we went to America. And he was like, I was so scared to go. He was so scared to go, which I was so scared to go to Saudi Arabia. And I was like, well, how was it? And he was like, yeah, we went to Orlando, and we went to New York. And I was like, well, how was it? And he was like, Dad, you know what? He was like, I was so scared. I was especially scared to go to New York because everything about guns and crime. He's like, but you know what? He was amazed telling me this. Like, the look on his face, he was like, I couldn't believe it. I felt so safe the entire time. It's nothing. And then he looks at me and he's like, it's nothing. Like, he wanted me to know this. He's like, it's nothing like what you see on the news or in social media. And I was like, holy Christ. This is going in the book. This is going in the book right now. And I went in the book. And I was just like, because this is exactly how I felt going to Saudi Arabia. I was so scared to go to Saudi Arabia. I ordered my burqa on Amazon. I'm like literally, I'm talking to everybody I know. And I went there and I felt so welcomed, and I met so many women who blew my mind, including Fatima, the driver of the pickup truck that needed a jump, who I write about extensively in the book, and who I also did a Q&A with in New York Times. So yeah, but like that power. So if we realize, the people, whoever this guy Abdullah met when he was in Orlando in New York, wow, like that could help. I mean, maybe he'll grow up to work in the Saudi government or be an international businessman.
Are we sure he was in New York? No.
But like, this is the power. If we welcome somebody from Saudi Arabia with a smile and politesse, politeness, and we're inviting them over for dinner maybe, or we're taking, taking the time to show them around a neighborhood, that could change the world, man. That can change the world. And anyway, so this is why I really wanted to write about Saudi Arabia. Anyway, also.
I agree. I think travel, one of the things we forget is if 1.5 billion people traveling this year, and they do what you just talked about, imagine the change that would happen in the world. And so we often think of diplomacy as something only for diplomats, for leaders, for presidents, but in reality, travel is the biggest diplomatic effort we have as a worldwide. I just was in Kenya, and I met this kid who doesn't have enough money. He's in his 20s. Says when you know you got old, you talk to somebody about his 20s as a kid. But he was a street child. He was 9 years old when he became homeless, and he became a tour guide. And I asked him if he's traveled before, and he said, no, I've never left Kenya, but I've been to the whole world through my tourists. I learned about America, and I read these books, and I know about this and about that. And the guy knew so much about stuff happening all over the world because of the people who went and took tours with him, because they weren't only learning from him, they were also sharing with him their own stories. And travel is give and take, is not only, oh, well, you know, you're my tour guide, tell me everything, and then when you're done, I'm done with you. It's a relationship.
Exactly. I mean, I think, and that's really, you know, how we move away from the type of travel that the guy you quoted was describing, or what Agnes Callard talks about, is just really looking for a sense of reciprocity and real exchange, and a real sense of, okay, even if I worked, like you're my tour guide and we're exchanging money, like my tour guide Fatima in Saudi Arabia, we're still human beings on the same plane. I'm not here and you're here and it's this way reaction, it's a this way reaction, interaction rather. And that's, if we can all kind of keep that sort of mindset, then that can go a really long way.
And to do that, you need intention for when you're traveling. I think often we think of travel, it's been built historically or in the last 50 years. It's a vacation, you go to the beach, you go to, I don't know, I never do that so much. So
Jamaica. I think there was a Jamaica trip.
That is true. You know how hard that was. It's not, but to me, always the trips, and I'm sure this is similar to you, the trips that always stay with me, you do these kind of fun, whatever, relaxing things, but the things that stays with you are those kind of moments. The moment you have with Abdullah, the moment you have with this tour guide in Kenya, the moment you have where you meet people and really get you to go, that moment of like, oh my goodness, how did I not think about that before? How did this not come to my mind? And every time I go somewhere, I'm like, I'm so much richer now, knowledge-wise. I can have a conversation about something I couldn't have before because I met someone and I learned something from them. What's amazing though, is I still find myself having stereotypes when I go to a new country. And it's incredible how strong these stereotypes are because, after traveling, I've been now to almost 80, I don't count, but I think it's about 70 to 80 countries. And when I was invited to go to Colombia, I've been already to 50, 60 countries before. I know so much about how the whole be afraid, don't go somewhere. And my first time going there, people have put so much fear into my mind that I got to my hotel and I'm like, I think I'll just stay in the hotel. I was there for a conference. The conference was at my hotel and I'm like, you know what, maybe Colombia is different. And I watched this film from Vice then that was about how everybody will drug you if you have a drink. They'll be like putting stuff in, even if you have coffee or tea, watch out. I'm like, this is terrifying. Now, I've been to Colombia a dozen times since then, and I realized most of that is BS. But my first time, even being a seasoned traveler, I fell for that kind of propaganda of like, be afraid of the world.
Well, I mean, we all have preconceived notions about the places we visit, and I think one of the things, the kind of pieces of homework we can give ourselves is to just first become aware of those, and and then open ourselves up to to having those views changed as we travel. Well, one question I'll put to you, Aziz, because this is something we talked about in our very first interview, I think if I remember correctly, is this, and it touches on a little bit what you were saying just now. It's easy to think of this kind of travel as maybe like a homework assignment, or like I'm going to go and I'm going to sort of educate myself and I'm going to do the right thing and I'm going to, but like, I mean, can I just go to the beach? I work, I get 3 weeks vacation. I want to go chill out. I want to escape. I want to just relax. Like, how do you, the kind of person who has that, who's in that sort of mindset, like how do you kind of talk to them to encourage them to have a different sort of approach?
I look at it as it's not either or. I think you can do the beach and have fun, and you can go and do all the cool sightseeing stuff, but also be intentional about what questions you're even asking to people. Adding activities, especially today, it's so easy to add experiential travel activities. Going to have dinner at somebody's home, which are so easy to do now. You go online, there are tons of those. Having a cooking class, going and, like in Nairobi, but now it's happening all over the world. You can find former homeless people who offer you tours. You can find former street children who can offer you tours. And these are the most incredible tours that you will have, because they'll show you something in the city that the normal classic tour guides often don't tell you. Try to find the voices that are unheard in these kind of places. There's always, if the narrative fits too well, something is not real about it. Like, no country has only one narrative and it all works very well, except America, obviously. So I think it's seeing that you can do both. You can have the fun, but even that sounds wrong, because those things are so much fun. Like a cooking class is a lot of fun. Being with these 3 kids that I was talking about in Kenya is so much fun. It was probably, I saw the coolest animals on that trip. I have lions and leopards, and I was showing Paige earlier, like so proud of all these moments. But honestly, my highlight of the trip was that day trip with Typhoon, that was his name. And he was just so cool and so charismatic and so interesting, and I felt like I understood finally Nairobi, because he told me stories that no one else would tell me. But I'll continue. Moving into a different areas, and there's a cultural element. There is the new tourist in the sense of like, how do I react to the world? But there's also hard decisions you have to do as a new tourist. And we've talked about how you deal with some of the today existential almost questions of tourism. For example, I was recently in a place called, a couple of years ago, in a place called San Blas Islands. And San Blas Islands are one of the most beautiful places probably you can go to, but it's islands that with the rise of water level are likely to slowly disappear.
In Panama. Yeah.
And they are in Panama. And so I face this question, what do? Do I tell my friends to go and see it? Do I go back? Do I run tours there as a tour company? Or do you not? This last chance kind of tourism. We today here, there are places in the world we can go see that the next generation will not be able to do that. So what do we do?
That was a question that I really wanted to dig into in the book, because last chance tourism, also known as like doom tourism, is definitely kind of like a theme, and it's coming up, and I'd heard and read a lot about it, this idea that some tourist destinations are actually, going to be wiped off the map by the changing climate. So I was living in the French Alps for most of the time that I was writing the book, and there's a glacier very handily sort of right around the corner in Chamonix. The Mer de Glace is the biggest glacier in the French Alps. And so I went there to kind of observe tourism and speak to people who live and work in the area and work in tourism. And I think it's fascinating because it's a really active debate, even among academics who are studying this. Can a visit to a disappearing glacier strike you so much at an emotional level that it really will inspire some behavior change and inspire some kind of like a deeper understanding of nature and one's place in the world? Or is this just kind of like a consumerist exercise? People want to come see this thing quick before it disappears, and so they can tick the box and they can get the selfie, and then they can go home and say like, oh yeah, I saw that too. Because as I write in the book, it's, for like centuries, for millennia, humans have been like striving to be the first to get somewhere, to do something, to document something. And now with climate change, in some cases, we're kind of racing to be the last. So I explored this in Chamonix, and I got to spend, I had 2 trips to the glacier, officially for the book. I've been to this glacier many times before. But I spent a day with the guy who digs the ice cave in the glacier, and I got to hang out with him on his machine while he was actually digging the ice cave, which was pretty cool. And then I went back with a mountain guide who, is also, this mountain guide also has a PhD in ecology, and he's leading the work of the company d'Équipe de Chamonix on how mountain guides should think about changing their work to adapt to the changing climate. So having those 2 perspectives was interesting, but reasonable people disagree on whether a visit to a glacier can inspire real behavior change. I like to be an optimist. That's just maybe how I'm wired. And having seen personally, people come to visit this glacier and be physically, be like moved to tears by, just how much the glacier has dropped in volume over the previous decades. So, but yeah, I think like, disappearing islands, bleaching coral reefs, glaciers, these are all things that climate change could make part of history very soon.
And these are, sometimes some of these questions are really hard to answer. And it's not only the last chance tourism, then you also have the places we often ask, should we go to or not, places where maybe not everyone wants us to be there. One of the chapters in your book talks about Hawaii and how you met people who are like, yes, we need more tourism, we need you to come, please come. And then another community that says, no, we don't want you in our country. And this is not only there, you see it in Barcelona, you see it in quite a few places actually. Now even Amsterdam is starting to have that kind of spirit. There's a lot of places are asking themselves, do we really want tourists? So how did you deal with that question?
Well, yeah, I knew I wanted to write about Hawaii in the book because many of you know my sister Kelly has lived in Hawaii since 2003, and I've been there many times over the years to visit her. And Kelly and her husband Gavin have nothing to do with tourism in their sort of day-to-day lives. And one thing that always struck me was how, when I would go to visit them, their lives were so completely different from the tourism, like the world of the tourists and the world of the residents just seemed completely separate from one another. So I spent some time in Hawaii for the book, and I interviewed people who are very pro-tourism and a native Hawaiian fellow who is very anti-tourism. But I thought his voice was really important to include in the book because it's important to include in the discussion. But no, I think in Hawaii they're doing some really fascinating and innovative things. And I also spent some time with the head of the Hawaii Tourism Authority, who is a man named John DeFries, who is also a native Hawaiian, and he's been heading the Hawaii Tourism Authority since September 2020. And in Hawaii, they're really actively grappling with this question of how to include local voices in the management of tourism and the sort of making of decisions around, the management of like specific tourist spots in Hawaii. So they have a long way to go, and the industry really has a strong influence on the government in a lot of ways, which I kind of describe in the book, describing this sort of board meeting that I got to be in which I got to be a little fly on the wall, and I heard some things that really surprised me. But they're grappling with it, and I think it's a fascinating example of a place that is trying to find the right way forward, and of course a place that's so dependent on tourism because without tourism, Hawaii needs its tourists. Hawaii needs its tourists. It needs to find a way to make sure it works for locals as well.
In addition to that, though, I find in some of these places where they talk about let's include the locals, sometimes it becomes a greenwash, including the locals, the ecotourism that's not really eco. Like, as I told you, I was in Kenya recently, and I decided to do this activity that I knew would be terrible, which is going to a Maasai village that's a touristy Maasai village. You pay $30 and you go there, and nothing there is really Maasai authentic. Like it's, you've been there, I'm sure. And those things exist all over, where it gives you, there's a show. You mentioned it even in the chapter about Hawaii. You start with like this dance and stuff, and you're like, how real is this versus it's just a show. You see it in here with the indigenous communities in Arizona or in Florida. You can go and watch some kind of ceremony that's not supposed to be even done except when there's a reason for that ceremony, but now it's done because of tourism. And you then grapple between, what am I doing? Am I making things worse while thinking, oh, this is authentic? And some people think it is authentic, but it's not. And so our common friend, Harold Goodwin, is a strong critique of that, and often me and him argue about it. It's like, then do you just not go there at all? And that's sometimes his opinion. Well, me and you may be a little bit more nuanced on it, but love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think the example that was coming to mind before you mentioned his name is the place where this guy Harold Goodwin is a professor in the UK, has worked. An example that I describe in the book as a really, really positive example of where communities are leading tourism, calling the shots in tourism, and really developing their local economy through tourism, and that is in Kerala in South India. Where actually in 2007 and 2008, residents of Kerala were so upset with how tourism was going at that point. It was kind of like big beach resort tourism. So Kerala is right on the southern tip of India, kind of right on the sort of southwestern tip right at the bottom. And beautiful white sand beaches, beautiful sort of backwater lagoons, like wonderful kind of fiery cuisine. And it's a really kind of, a very atmospheric and beautiful place to visit. They had a lot of beach resort tourism, and locals were so unhappy that they weren't seeing any economic benefit from this, and the tourists were just leaving a lot of litter in the lagoons and on the beaches. But they actually staged street protests against tourism. The government listened, and they brought in some outside experts, including our friend Harold Goodwin, to study this problem. And they really started a whole project to come up with some pilot projects. How can we bring local voices more to tourism? And they developed a whole program around it, which 15 years later has become a real model for all of India. And now the leader of the protests in 2008, this guy Rupesh Kumar, is now an employee of the government running the responsible tourism mission in Kerala. And so I spent some time with him for the book. So that's I think, so how do you do it? And what one of the things that they found that really worked is having the villages run these sort of cultural things. So when I was in Kerala, I learned to sort of like weave a basket. I drank some of like the palm wine. I learned to climb a palm tree using a kind of rickety, sketchy machine. I rode around in the local boats, and you have these like really like you're invited into someone's home. And but all of these people, it was all directed by the people who lived in these villages. You really felt like you were being invited in, and I knew that they were being paid for this, and I knew that they were the ones who had decided that this is how they wanted to do it, and it had been voted on by their local panchayat, the local council. So I'm like, this is cool. It was good. It was fun, and it was fascinating. So I think prioritizing the voices of the people whose culture it is that's being shared, which is exactly what they're trying to do in Hawaii, and they have a longer way to go, but they're really doing a lot. But yeah, Kerala, India is a wonderful example. I would definitely recommend Kerala as a destination in India. It's a very chill part of India, which I didn't realize existed.
Awesome. Which I'm hoping to go maybe in December.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll want you to join us now. You can we welcome you back in. But maybe just before, as you're thinking of a question, comment you want to add, you went through kind of the history of travel and how travel increased, and the travel writing and travel guidebooks, and how the industry has changed in an unbelievable way within one generation pretty much. Where do you see it going?
Interesting. Well, I might use the start of your question to just talk a little bit about how I opened the book and like going over I went to so I kind of had some adventures, and we go to Cambodia, and we go to the glacier, and we go to Saudi Arabia, and we go to Hawaii, and we go to Iceland, but the first chapter of the book, I'm like, I want to bring my reader up to the present moment. Like, we are in this sort of extraordinary moment in travel. How did we get here? And so I go back to the 1970s, and I tell the story of this couple of young baby boomers who made an overland trip from England to Australia, and then went on to found the most influential travel brand of the 20th century, Lonely Planet, and how this sort of one overland trip by Tony and Maureen Wheeler led to the foundation of a company that would change the way so many of us see the world, and that would really open up for tourism parts of the world that were just inaccessible because of a lack of information. And and Tony and Maureen Wheeler, I was lucky enough to interview Tony a couple of times for the book. We're just one of like a small group of like really kind of adventurous young baby boomers in the 70s and early 80s who really forged a path that changed the world and changed us and us travelers in profound ways. So I wanted to bring us to the current moment. But yeah, where do I see travel going? I think that's a better question for you, Aziz. But no, I'll say I want to hear your thoughts on that one. But I mean, we know that tourism is growing much faster, at a much faster pace than the global economy. Tourism is going to continue to grow. I mean, we're breaking this world record, this all-time record for international tourist arrivals this year. People want to travel. It's more affordable than ever. I think we're going to see more stories like those of Amsterdam and Barcelona, where the government went hard on tourism, and then they became a little bit overwhelmed. So one of my motivations in writing the book was really to kind of dig into a little bit the examples from Amsterdam and Barcelona to see how they're grappling with it. What are they doing? Because I think a lot of other places will have the chance to learn something by understanding those examples in a little bit more depth. But no, I think tourism already touches every corner of the planet, right? Like natural areas, cities, rural areas, everywhere, and that influence is going to grow in more and more places, which is a fascinating and wonderful and phenomenon that makes me excited and hopeful for the future on one hand, and also makes me think, okay, we need to be ready. We travelers need to be thoughtful about how we do this, and the places receiving the tourists need to be ready and need to educate themselves. Yeah.
I agree. I would only add that I think when we think of travel, it's interesting. There are places completely ignored today, and then some famous person goes there, takes a photo, suddenly we all go, that must be in my top 10 things I have to see. And the thing is, there are so many places around the world that are fascinating. They don't have to be in a travel book. They don't have to have been visited by Justin Bieber, which you mentioned in the book.
I went to the Justin Bieber Canyon in Iceland. I write about that. Yeah.
Or
not with him.
No.
After him. I followed in his footsteps, like many hundreds of thousands of others.
Right, like I think of Croatia, for example, and so many tourists love to go to Dubrovnik. But just north of Dubrovnik, south of Dubrovnik, there's a lot of amazing.
Runs tours in Croatia. Yeah.
What is that?
I said you run tours in Croatia.
I do run tours in Croatia. So I've been to Dubrovnik, and I saw how angry locals were. But the funny thing, if you go a little bit away from Dubrovnik, people want tourism. And it's not that it's less beautiful. It is incredibly beautiful places. If you go up all the way the northern side of the same coast, you'll have places that look quite similar to Dubrovnik, and yet empty. No one is there because everyone heard of Game of Thrones, and so therefore you go there, and the only thing you keep hearing tourists talking about is the King's Landing, which I had no idea what they were talking about, but apparently it's famous. And that's, I think, the only way to make future of tourism sustainable. Whether we do it or not is in question, but I think realizing there are places desperate for tourism, while there are places that are tired of tourism for good reasons, and we need to balance this.
I mean, that's a point. Excuse me. I mean, as somebody who is a travel journalist, when I meet, at some sort of gathering, and I'm chatting with the parents of my child's friend or something, and they're like, "Oh, so what do you do?" And, And I'm like, oh, I'm a travel journalist, or I'm a journalist who writes about travel and tourism. And they're like, oh, I'm always really careful. Like, I don't want to cause any problems. Or so people are more and more sensitive. But I always want to say, like, there are museums in Venice that are suffering from not getting enough visitors, right? Yeah, like an Italian journalist who like lives very close to Venice, like told me this, and I'm like, really, Anna, really? And she's like, yeah, let me give you a list of the museums in Venice that need more visitors, that need more support. And she was telling me, go to Venice, don't go at the peak times of year, go to sort of an off season, stay overnight, don't come as a day tourist, and explore. And the people of Venice will be so happy to have you there. You'll be welcomed. You'll be contributing to the economy. You'll have a wonderful cultural experience. Like, this is what, like, the word over tourism sort of rubs me the wrong way, because I think it can just be too easy to paint a place with a bad brush. But no, there are ways, if we're thoughtful, there are ways to visit some of these iconic tourist destinations, get a little bit off the beaten path, and have a wonderful time. So I would encourage people to not be too, to be thoughtful, but also not to be, to be optimistic as they're kind of in their thoughtfulness.
Yeah. And my favorite experiences are probably, one, I have to say, whenever you tell people I've been all over, they're like, give me where I should go. Give me your top 3 countries. I'm like, no, I don't want to give you my top 3 countries, because my top 3 might not be your top 3. Each one of us is a little different. I care about certain things. You might value certain art that different than the art I do. And so the whole idea of like this top 7 destinations, top 10 destinations, really doesn't make any sense at all. But in general, my experience has been, even when I go to cities, my best experiences is when I leave those cities and go somewhere that I've never heard of and was not on my plan, and just allow myself to explore something totally out of anything that you've ever heard of, and you end up encountering the greatest experiences, whether it was in Japan or whether it's in Vietnam or whether it's in all these places. The moment you do something not in the, here's the tick box of like the 3 museums are in everybody's book, the moment you go out of those, it's incredible what you end up encountering. And on that note, let's see if any of you would like to ask a question or share or...
Catherine.
You should be handling this part.
Yes, Catherine.
You'll know.
My fellow East Chapel High School class of 2000.
Also, if you have stories about Paige you'd like to know.
Catherine and I have known each other since kindergarten.
Wow. Thereabouts.
Yeah.
So I have a question that I don't know, it's too big to answer, and maybe you talk about it in the book, but I do a lot of travel for my work and also pleasure, and I feel like I want to do all the things that you're describing, and if I'm thinking about a trip, I will look around for resources to point me in the direction of the things that you're describing. And I used to read Lonely Planet. I didn't actually remember that much about it because it's been a while, but like what a resource it was and maybe still is. But nowadays there's just such an information overload. Yeah. Like you go online and you search things to do near Mexico City, and you just can't possibly have any idea what you're seeing, and you can't know if the blog that you're reading is actually just sponsored by somebody, and it's really hard to sift through the enormous weight when you don't have any kind of personal connection and you're trying still to make good choices. I find it's maybe even harder now than it used to be because there's just so much to get through. So do you see any kind of, I mean, I look at the New York Times, I read your stuff, for example, but like, do you see a kind of way through all of that when people are traveling who don't have any history with the place or are curious but don't know where to start? Because I feel like I've been in that position many times.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what you're saying makes me think of so at the in the first chapter, I'm describing the kind of the rise and decline of the travel guidebook. But actually, at the end, there's a little bit of a like backup, And actually, like a few travel guidebook publishers, including Rick Steves, who I gotta say I'm a big fan, because he's a big fan.
Same.
And like Pauline Fromer, whose dad, Arthur Fromer, started the Fromer's Guides. She runs it now. She's wonderful. She and Rick Steves both told me they're seeing their guidebook sales are going up now. And I think it's for exactly the reason that you're talking about. People are just kind of like, oh my God, someone curate some of this information for me. And how do I find a trusted source of information that I know, like somebody has actually gone out and ground truth this? And, you know, not to be a Rick Steves kind of fangirl here, but like he still goes to Europe every time. I mean, he writes guidebooks for Europe. So Mexico City, he couldn't help you, but he's still like in his whatever late 60s out there ground truthing his guides and doing the research. And so I think if you could find, you know, a high quality guide. And Lonely Planet, so I interviewed the you know, the current like head of Lonely Planet. It's a very different sort of outfit now, but they're still doing, you know, they're still trying. They've shifted a lot more to online and stuff. But I'd say, yeah, the Rick Steves guides and Pauline Fromer. So find a good, trusted sort of guidebook source, and you know, get back to basics there, maybe.
Yeah.
And finding, you know, always like. I always recommend finding a local tour guide, because then, you know, as you can start there, and then they can give you recommendations. And to find a local tour guide, like ask around if you have friends who've been there, but also contacting the tourism board for that place, and because they often have lists. In a lot of countries, there are like you have to go through a certification program to be licensed. But if you want to go to, I don't know, some random city in like Toulouse or something in France, you contact like the Visit Toulouse or whatever. They should be able to give you a list of locally certified like tour guides who could help you, you know, take you around for a day, and then you can get advice from them. But yeah, I'm sure you have.
Yeah, I think all of that, absolutely. Contacting the tourism board, I think, is always helpful, because you can also tell them what you're looking for. Like I've done it before and say, I'm looking for social justice focused stuff, and you will get that. But even when I'm searching online, it depends on the keywords you use. And I have to say, I've come across, you can't always know that's going to be what you want until you do it. And sometimes it's hit or miss, but most often it is positive. If you're searching, like the way I found these guys in Kenya, I just went online and was like, you know, I'm gonna look and see what I'm gonna find. I put some social justice things and some like alternative kind of travel and things like that, and they popped up, and I read multiple articles about them and saw that there's a consistency, so it looked real, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try these guys. And it ended up being amazing. But there is always a potential risk that, yeah, every now and then you're gonna hit oops, this wasn't what I signed up for.
And you get the good story.
Yeah.
I was in college in the early 90s, and even at that point we were discussing how to make tourism more equitable, have it reach the people who are really from that community. So when you were talking about this, like with India and with Hawaii, it sounded like they're new projects and new efforts. So what have been the major roadblocks over the past decades to where we're at now?
Yeah. Well, I think in the case of Hawaii, it was just that the way tourism got started there, it was really the kind of big business was kind of directing things like right from the beginning, and there wasn't the sort of infrastructure to include community voices at the very beginning of the kind of tourism making process. And so as tourism got really big, kind of starting with Hawaiian statehood, you know, and then in the 60s and 70s as jet travel became a lot cheaper, the structure of business being in charge just kind of like stayed. And so today, the Hawaii Tourism Authority is a state agency, right? And with the John DeFries, is that, you know, he's a government employee who's at the head of this HTA. I sat in on their monthly board meeting, and who are the members of the board? It's who are like, you know, who John is, you know, has to answer to at the end of the day. They're the head of the $800 million Aulani Resort, right? It's like the owner of the biggest hotel chain in Hawaii. These are his board of directors, right? So that's kind of like baked into the structure of decision making around tourism in Hawaii in a way that, like, I live in France, which is the world's single biggest tourist destination. I mean, France like welcomes more tourists than any other country in the world. And there, the decision, all the like that kind of structure that I saw in Hawaii, like, would be unthinkable. It's such a government. I mean, it's socialist country, right? It's such a government organized, such a government sort of led from the kind of district level to the, like the village to the department to the region to the national level. It's government officials making those decisions at every level. So, yeah, I think for places that are starting in tourism now are really building something, like building in ways for either through elected officials or kind of community groups, ways to include community voices right now as tourism is really growing is really important. And in Hawaii, I'll just add one thing that John DeFries is really pushing now is what they call DMAPs, the Destination Management Action Plans, which are really community-led action plans for tourism on each of the islands. So I think each of the 5 major islands has its own DMAP, and they brought together school teachers and librarians and people who run restaurants and like all different members of the community to help write these plans. And it's been in the process for several years, and they're very proud of these DMAPs, as they call them. And so it's really, so when I say they're doing good work, they are doing good work, and I write about this a little bit in the end in a way that I hope isn't too policy, geeky. So they're trying to bring those local voices in now in a way that they didn't back in the sort of 50s and 60s. Yeah.
I'll only add that, and then we'll have our last question. I'll only add that this is not new in the sense, it goes back to the 1920s. Some of the earliest cables we get from the British Empire, kind of messaging, going letters back and forth between Egypt, ambassador or whoever was in charge from the British Empire in Egypt and the government back in London, was about when tourism started in Egypt, of British tourists going there. And there were threats very quickly against the tourists. And the assumption was, well, it's a Muslim community, they didn't want these people coming from England, and that wasn't the case. When they looked into research why, the locals were saying, well, all these tourists coming in and none of us benefiting from it. Nobody, our life is changing, but we're not benefiting from it. They get these nice buildings and everything is cool for them, but what about us? And so this has been a question that's going on for over 100 years. But it takes humans quite a while to learn. We've been too slow. All right, last question.
I'd be interested in your thoughts on Airbnb tourism. And, I think for a lot of us, we thought that was the way to be a new tourist and to immerse ourselves in communities and cultures, but it has other impacts. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it still can be. I mean, I think Airbnb, gets a bad rap in a lot of ways, but I encourage people to continue to consider it, but with care and with caution, because I think and what the research, there's a fellow named Daniel Gutentag at the University of he's in Charleston, but he's an academic who's done a lot of research on Airbnb, and he was telling me, look to avoid the professional operators, like the people who own 100 different units and they're turning these over. Those are the people who are having a negative impact on the housing market, like the housing prices, housing supply. If you find somebody who has the granny flat downstairs that they're renting out and it's really their place, they're more likely to rent it out for fewer nights of the year, right? And it's less likely to have a big impact on the value, which means it's less likely to have a big impact on the value of their house. So he was, he's done a lot of research on this, and he was saying, use it, with care, and just try to avoid the professional operators. But also, I think I've used Airbnb a lot over the years. I'm sure I will in the future. Always trying to look for the real kind of individual homeowners who are renting out a place they already own. But I've also kind of recently just fallen in love with little hotels again. and the services that you have there, and trying to find hotels that are locally owned, and the whole experience of being in a hotel. But because sometimes you really just need, and like when my kids were really small, like hotels didn't appeal that much. Like you needed the space to, let them run around. So I would say be careful about it. Also, especially if you're going to a big city, take a few minutes to Google, like, okay, what are the rules in Madrid on Airbnb? Like, I don't know, but Google it, and then make sure that the place that you're going to stay, they have their official license or whatever the requirement is. Just to, and then then go and enjoy and try to make a connection with the host, right? So yeah.
I think I agree. I was just at, it's an ecosystem. No one company and no one change is gonna really make this work. It's different things together that can help this change. When companies grow too fast, too quickly, too big, it's always creates a lot of problems, and it's how they're gonna deal with it, which it could go into a good direction or not, and we'll see how it moves forward.
Yeah, I mean, but especially in Europe, like a lot of cities have really woken up to this in Europe, and are really actively regulating it now. So that would almost give me more confidence, knowing like if you go to a place like Amsterdam or Paris or Barcelona, those governments are on top of that now. They are taxing that, they are regulating that, they are checking on it. I mean, not to say that there aren't loopholes that people can find their way, out of. But if you're going to Paris, you want to stay in an Airbnb, like look for know that they're going to be checked on, they're following the rules, you're going to be paying tax to the city of Paris, and look for a real homeowner to stay with, and then like have a good time.
All right, thank you, Paige. Any final words you like?
Final words. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, Aziz, for joining me here. And just to say, if anyone would like to chat afterwards, hang out for a little bit. My father has very kindly reserved some spaces at Lucha Tigre, just next door. So please come join. It would be wonderful to hang out and have a drink, have a bite to eat. I'll be there, and for the next hour or two, having some food, and it would be wonderful to continue the conversation about the book or about life or whatever. So thank you so much for coming.